Today on Sports Central, we'll be going over our next full prediction of this 2020 offseason, and it will be over the Texas A&M Aggies. And this is a team that went 8-5 in the 2019 season. Overall, it was a decent season for the Aggies. I mean, certainly could have been better, but I expect them to be a big team next season. And I think this could be a team that certainly could cause some damage in the SEC next season. And that's what we're going over here today. We're going to be going over a full preview on Texas A&M, as well as a prediction on every game in Texas A&M's schedule heading into 2020. So yeah, with that, let's look at your season trends from 2019 for Texas A&M. And they were 5-3 between September and October, as well as 3-2 between November and the postseason. So this is a very consistent team all season long. And once again, they did accumulate 5 losses over the season, but they still were a pretty consistent team. I mean, they didn't really have a big decline, and they didn't really improve a lot at the same time. But overall, still a decent season for the Aggies. Some of your key wins from last season: they beat Lamar 62-3 on September 14th. And I mean, I understand Lamar definitely is not a great team, and they are in a much different conference than Texas A&M is. But still, I mean, a 62-3 win, still a very good win there. They also had a win against Mississippi State on October 26th, 49-30. They had a big win against South Carolina, 30-6. Then they also beat Oklahoma State in their bowl game, 24-21. So, yeah, of course, at the end of the season, they got a couple big wins there. Once again, with Mississippi State and South Carolina, a couple of good wins there. But of course, once again, being 8-5, I think Texas A&M did have more potential last season. But I mean, if you remember me going over my schedule previews last offseason, this Texas A&M team, I thought from the start they had a ton of potential going into 2019. I mean, they just had an absolutely brutal schedule. They had to play Clemson at the beginning of the season, and they also had an absolutely brutal SEC schedule. So yeah, for Texas A&M, it was just a tough season overall. But I mean, the schedule really does not look as bad for Texas A&M. We'll get to that in a second going into 2020. They do return quarterback Kellen Mond for his senior season. I think Kellen Mond definitely could be a quarterback that could be a top 3 in the SEC next season. He's got a ton of talent. He's a big dual threat quarterback too. He put up over 500 yards of rushing last season. He also had 2,800 yards of passing with 20 touchdowns and 9 interceptions. So yeah, he put up some pretty good stats last season. They also returned their top running back Isaiah Spiller, which he had just right over 1,100 yards with 10 touchdowns last season. And they also returned their top receiver and Jamon Osborne, which he had just right around 870 yards with 5 touchdowns last season. So they returned their top quarterback, running back, and wide receiver. Very huge there. And of course, Isaiah Spiller was their main running back. There wasn't really a big running back besides him. So yeah, overall, this running back core is looking pretty good. And same with the receiving core, well, at least somewhat. I mean, you do return your tight end in Jalen. Of course, he was a big part of this team, nearly 500 yards with 6 touchdowns last season. But you do lose your second and third receivers in Courtney Davis and Kendrick Rogers. Of course, Courtney Davis had just right around 700 yards last season. And then Kendrick Rogers, on the other hand, he didn't have as big of an impact on this team. He did put up a decent amount of yardage, but of course not as much as Courtney Davis or Jamon Osborne. So yeah, overall, this offense is looking pretty good as far as the skill players go. Your only big loss is your second and third wide receivers. They also lose 1 on the offensive line, 1 defensive tackle, and 1 cornerback. So basically, this defense is looking very, very good heading into 2020. And I mean, defensive line too, losing only 1 on there. I mean, this team definitely has got a ton of potential and a ton of upside going into 2020. Watch out. Is Texas A&M a college football playoff dark horse? And now, I mean, whenever someone mentions the college football playoff, I don't care if it's an analyst or anyone, no one has mentioned Texas A&M in my knowledge. Of course, I really haven't heard much out of analysts talking about Texas A&M, but I think this is definitely a team that could put up some big damage in the SEC. They could definitely get a couple of big wins in there. I think Texas A&M could be a dark horse for the college football playoff. I mean, who knows? It's tough to say, but I do think that Texas A&M could be a team that really could rise next season. I mean, when you got Kellen Mond under center, who is a quarterback that I believe is one of the best in the SEC coming up into the next season, and we all know how good the quarterbacks are in the SEC. So that's a pretty big achievement if you can be a top 3 quarterback in that conference. And I mean, overall, I mean, Texas A&M returning most of their production in general definitely leads me to believe that this team could put up some pretty good wins next season. That also brings up the question, chances of contending in the SEC. I think this team definitely could contend in their division. Of course, they've got an absolutely brutal division, but once again, I do expect them to contend. That doesn't mean that they're going to win it next season. I think that there are a couple other teams that I would probably pick before Texas A&M to win the division right now. But I mean, once again, still a great season coming up for Texas A&M in my opinion. Tons of talent coming back on both sides of the ball. So with that, let's look at your schedule for the next season. You start off the season with Abilene Christian on the 5th. and then you got North Texas on the 12th. So you got 2 big home games against pretty easy teams. So yeah, overall the first couple games should be blow through. Then you got on the 19th, you got Colorado at home. Then you got Arkansas in a neutral location. So you do have the first 3 weeks of the season at home. And then you got a road trip to Mississippi State on the 3rd. You got Fresno State on the 10th. So, I mean, in my opinion, I mean, if you look at those first 6 games especially, I think Texas A&M could easily start out 6-0. I mean, that Mississippi State game will probably be the toughest one out of those 6 games. But overall, yeah, looking really good for Texas A&M to go 6-0 to start off the season. As far as the second half of your schedule, you got 2 tough road games to start it off with Auburn and South Carolina at the end of October. Then you got Ole Miss in November, followed by Vanderbilt, and then 2 brutal games against Alabama and LSU. And certainly, I mean, Alabama and LSU both, I do expect to be pretty good going into next season, especially the Alabama team. And here's what I'm expecting out of your September 1st. I think you go 4-0 through September. You got Abilene Christian, North Texas, who both teams really aren't that good. And then that Colorado team, I do think they give Texas A&M some trouble. Of course, that's a rematch, actually, of a Big 12 matchup that we used to see. And so that should be an interesting matchup there, but I do expect Texas A&M to get a win there. Then you got Arkansas in a neutral location. Should be an interesting game there, but I do expect Texas A&M to get a pretty easy win. And overall, moving on to your October, I think you go 3-1 in this month. I think you get a win against Mississippi State on the road, but it'll be close. It'll certainly be a close one. You also get a big win against Fresno State. I think that one's going to be an easier one. And then you take your first loss of the season, so I do expect you to go 6-0 to start off the season. But you take your first loss against Auburn. That's going to be, I mean, that's going to be a brutal game. With it being in Auburn and a really tough location to play, and Auburn I do expect to be a really good team next season. I think Auburn and Texas A&M are pretty much equally alike going into next season. I think both teams have a pretty similar skill set. I mean, they both got great quarterbacks, and they both got great offenses in general. And I mean, the defense ain't bad either. So yeah, I definitely think Auburn and Texas A&M both are pretty equally matched going into next season. So that could be a big matchup there for sure. As far as your November goes, I'm going to give you 2 losses in this one. I think Ole Miss and Vanderbilt, with them both being at home, those are both going to be wins. But I mean, as much as Texas A&M fans want to win at least one game between Alabama and LSU, I just think, I mean, if it were in a different order, if you played LSU at home first and Alabama on the road in the second week, I definitely think Texas A&M could at least beat LSU. But the thing is, though, you've got at Tuscaloosa to play Alabama, of course, and I expect them to be a great team. And then you have a quick turnaround to play LSU at home the next week. It just doesn't set up very well those last 2 games. I just don't think that Texas A&M is going to be able to win one of those games. I mean, even if you beat Alabama, that LSU game is going to be pretty tough. But in the end, once again, Texas A&M, your record prediction will be 9-3 going into 2020, and that's a better record than last season. And I definitely think Texas A&M has potential to get up to 10 wins, but just their schedule doesn't set up that way. Having a tough road game at Auburn, of course, I do expect that to be a winnable game for Texas A&M. I think they've got potential to win that, but I just don't think it's going to happen in this circumstance. But yeah, with that being said, that about wraps up our final prediction on Texas A&M. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to slap a like on it and subscribe as well. It really helps out the channel, and I'd really appreciate that a ton. But yeah, once again, thank you guys all for watching. Be sure to let me know your thoughts in the comments below on Texas A&M. If you disagree with anything here, be sure to let me know. And yeah, thanks for all the support once again. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central, and I will see you all later.